Hello, and welcome to this session on using Ansible with checkpoint management APIs. I'm your host, Dwayne, and I appreciate you having me here today. In this session, it's time to start the construction. Here we will start with building the Ansible inventory for your checkpoint management server. Since this session runs a bit long, it will be divided into several sections, and I'll have those sections clearly marked in case you need to pause or skip around. The first section is all about building and defining the inventory structure for each type of management server. This section includes a crash course in YAML, if you need it. In the second section, we'll add the attributes and variables to describe the inventory components at different levels. At the end, you'll run a few more Ansible verification commands. Along the way, we'll get some help from a few little friends and some things. Grab yourself a beverage and let's get started. Let's build an inventory. Inventories come in all shapes and sizes. The Ansible inventory structure is incredibly flexible. You can build the inventory in almost innumerable ways. Since this series is focused on the checkpoint APIs, I'm going to limit everything to that perspective. However, you can expand this to other things if you like. For checkpoint management servers, there are a few different methods we have to cover depending on your type of environment. I will break these down into three small segments. The first segment is for everyone, which will include an introduction to YAML. The second segment is for the single domain security management server and Smart One Cloud. The third segment is for multi-domain management environments. Segment number 1, inventory for everyone. The inventory file gets everything started. The inventory defines three simple things: the hosts we care about, the groups we care about, and what hosts should be in which groups. That's it. That's the inventory. This is a plain text file you can write in generally one of two ways. The classic INI style from the ancient days. For you old schoolers out there, yes, this is the same thing made famous by Windows 3.0 and 3.1 in the early 1990s. We will not use this format because it gets convoluted fast. Or YAML. We will use this format as it is much preferred and maintains consistency, which is what this whole series is about. You can use JSON, but that's intended only for use when pulling an inventory dynamically from something like Amazon AWS, Kubernetes controllers, or even a custom script to generate an inventory. That will be saved for another day, however. Why use YAML? Because it's fast, easy, and has a clearly defined layout. If you don't have much experience or knowledge with YAML, well, we're about to fix that. Don't worry, you'll understand it in about 3 seconds time when you see it shortly. Here are the plans for our inventory. First, we will define two groups, a group for the checkpoint management host and a group for the checkpoint gateways. I'm not talking about clusters or VSX here yet. Stay tuned. Second, we will define the host to join those groups. Probably obvious, but these are the individual management server hosts and gateways you have. Why use a group for the management host? Because this creates some flexibility when we go to define variables and attributes in a few moments. If you are a checkpoint support partner or MSP and you manage multiple environments like I do, then you definitely want a group for the management servers. For Smart One Cloud folks, you'll treat your management instance just like a single security management server. The gateways and the gateway group aren't necessary for the management API purposes right now, but we'll expand this when we get to the episode for Gaia API and clusters and yes, VSX. Now you need to write all of this information as YAML. Here's a 3-minute lesson in YAML. YAML has a few basic constructs just like everything else: a string of text, booleans, integers, lists, and dictionaries. Strings are written literally as they are, a string of text. Quoting these strings is optional, but there are some corner cases where it is required. We'll try to avoid those if we can. Booleans, to you and I, are written literally as well. You write the words true or false, but not quoted, and in lowercase. To us humans, they look like strings. For those of you coming from Python, these booleans are written all lowercase. Python writes them in a capitalized case, but Ansible uses lowercase only. Integers are written literally as they are as well, but unquoted. 1, 2, 3, etc. Lists and dictionaries are where the simple formatting rules really shine. A list is started by prepending the first list item with a hyphen or dash character. Any other line that also begins with a hyphen is a new element in that list or a new index in an array. Same thing. Here's an example of a YAML list and the corresponding way the variable gets referenced. A dictionary is defined by ending a string of text on a line with a colon character. Be careful here, no blank spaces at the end. A dictionary is a collection of attributes that are attached to the dictionary. This is called a hash if you're from a Perl background. If you use JSON, then these are the exact same elements, but without the explicit quoting and the explicit open-close delimiters. The lack of markup is what makes YAML fast and easy to both read and write. Here's a JSON object and the same object as YAML. Exact same thing, different models. In semantic terms, YAML is best suited for data at rest, whereas JSON is best suited for data in transit. It's okay if you don't fully understand that yet. You'll see it in practice soon and throughout your automation life. You'll see this again when we get to the modeling episode later. However, just like Python, but unlike JSON, YAML is strictly dependent on the levels of indentation. Indentation is achieved by a series of double spaces before the line of text. That's 2 spaces, not a horizontal tab. A tab is ASCII key code 9, spaces are ASCII key code 32. You need to know this one hard and fast rule in order to write YAML yourself. YAML documents begin with a triple hyphen sequence and close with a triple dot sequence. This helps the parsers know when to engage rather than relying on context and a best guess. These mark the beginning and end of YAML document content. The Ansible documentation has a great YAML tutorial with more details. That's it. Welcome to YAML. Next, we'll build an inventory for the single domain security management server and SmartOne Cloud. For you MDS folks, you should probably still sit in on this segment just so I don't have to repeat a bunch of stuff later in your segment. Segment number 2, the inventory for security management and SmartOne Cloud. Okay, let's cut to the chase. Here is your first inventory. For extra grouping and organization, I have defined a third meta group named check_point. This is a classic group of groups. I did this because I'm preparing you ahead of time for a future episode in this series. This meta group contains both the management server group and the gateways group. In Ansible terms, when you include a group inside another group, the nested group is considered a child of the top group. However, within a specific group, the members of that group are labeled as hosts. Groups are children, the members are hosts. In the CKP MGMT group, you see the name of my management server. Here it is CPMGMT01. In the CKP GW group, you see the name of my one gateway, CPGW01. For you SmartOne Cloud folks, you can use a cosmetic alias here for your SmartOne Cloud tenant. In your case, CPMGMT01 would be this alias. When we define attributes in a moment, I'll show you how to map this to your tenant and management instance. You don't have to write out that long host name just to define an inventory item. You're welcome to include any smart event servers if you like in the management group. Even though part of the management API works on smart event servers, there is no specific API for smart event as of this recording at the end of 2024. This applies to any dedicated log servers you may have. If you have any management HA hosts, you can add them here as well. Already you can see the levels of indentation at play. You can see each line also ends with a colon. Lines ending with colons are dictionary keys. The value of the key on the next indented line determines its type. A line at the same level of indentation is a new dictionary. A dictionary key here can have an empty value. So taking a step back, you can see that an Ansible inventory is really just a big old collection of dictionaries. Therefore, it is a dictionary of dictionaries. This simple inventory may not look much like a dictionary structure, but an inventory can contain many other items and attributes. I'm leaving those attributes out of here on purpose so it's not so overwhelming and confusing. Like I said at the top of this, inventories can be defined in all kinds of ways. You can also see there's an even higher level group all the way at the top named all. This is Ansible's own internal global group. You aren't strictly required to define this group and its children, but you probably should. In the all group, you can define whatever child groups you want. Here I added the checkpoint meta group to the all group. Okay, save this file as the name inventory.yml and in the directory named inventory. So now back in your terminal, you can run your next Ansible verification command, ansible-inventory --list. Hopefully you got everything in the correct place. If so, now notice, you actually see a JSON version of the same inventory. That's because of the way Ansible's YAML parser works. What you are seeing here is a miniature example of what I said earlier, data in transit. YAML, or the data at rest, was loaded, handled and parsed in some way, and thus the handling of that data was transmitted as JSON. In this output, you can see your user groups and the members of those groups. For the meta groups, you see the name of the child groups. Notice that the hosts themselves aren't duplicated as subsequent children of these meta groups. Ansible's inventory parser later handles the unwrapping of the nested groups. You can see a visual version of the inventory with this command, ansible-inventory --graph. This gives you a nice ASCII text tree of the groupings rather than you having to do the mental gymnastics and parse that JSON output. Okay, for those of you with a single domain security management servers and those with SmartOne Cloud, you can sit back and relax for a while. I need to talk to the folks in the room who have multi-domain management. You're welcome to sit in on this segment and see how the other half lives. You might even learn something. I'll be back to you in a bit when we get to the attribute segment at the end. Alright, hello MDS folks. This segment is all about you. Here's what your inventory should look like. I assume you sat in on that last segment for the security management folks. Similar to the security management server inventory earlier, you should have the checkpoint meta group defined in the same way, and you should have the management server group defined. In this case, it will be CKP_MGMT. For you, CPMGMT01 would represent your MDS server name. If you had MDS-HA, then you would add CPMGMT02, 03, etc. for as many HA servers you have. Here I'm talking about the top level MDS server, not the individual domain management servers. You can include your global smart event server if you like, although the API support is limited to just the MDS system data domain on that server. The group CKP MGMT will be used for the root of the MDS server. Just like in Smart Console, this management group of MDS hosts is where you will assign the global domain to your individual management domains. That's also where you add and delete domains, administrators, trusted clients, etc. This will be your system data domain. You will also want to add one more group named MGMT_domains, or whatever name you want to use to represent the totality of your management domains. What might not be so obvious is you will define a host entry in the Ansible inventory that will represent the name of each of your MDS management domains. Also, perhaps not so obvious, I am not talking about the CMA name like you use with the MDS-env command. The CMA, now called DMS for Domain Management Server, is the specific domain hosting server where the management domain is active, such as if you're using MDS-HA. In Ansible, just like Smart Console, you will refer to the management domain, not the management domain server. I also have a management domain named Global to represent the global domain. If your global domain has a different name than Global, then of course use that instead. You can also see the MGMT domains group was added to the checkpoint meta group above. As for the details of telling Ansible how to connect to the management domains, hang on a moment, we'll get there shortly in the attribute section. Right now, we're just building the skeletal structure. Okay, save this file as inventory.yml and in the directory named inventory and run your verification command, ansible-inventory --list. Here you see your inventory structure and the relationships. You can see the ASCII text tree version with the command ansible-inventory --graph. That's the skeletal structure for the MDS. Okay, Security Management Server and SmartOne Cloud folks, come on back. Feel free to pause here for a moment if you need to make any corrections or additions that you like for your inventory. All right. Now that the inventory skeletal structure is done, we can start building the connective tissue holding this thing together. In this section, we'll talk about the attributes. From here on out, it is all YAML all the time. You will also get an overview of Ansible's inheritance rules, and you get to run those Ansible verification commands. All right, let's get it done. Inventory attributes, like the inventory itself, can be applied in many possible places. Ansible is incredibly flexible and generous with these options. I've used just about all possible combinations for myself, and I've decided to quasi-standardize on one particular method that is most consistent and most flexible. Quasi. I'm never a fan of single giant monolithic things, just as a Windows admin should never use a single giant GPO for their entire network, although some still do. And just as you never use one giant object group in Smart Console for all your hosts and networks, although it's been done. Therefore, we won't be using a single giant file for our inventory attributes and variables. Under the inventory directory, you will make two subdirectories, group_vars and host_vars. These two names are required by Ansible. Do not deviate. Under the group vars directory, make a directory named for each group in your inventory file. Under the host vars directory, you can probably guess what's coming. Yep, make a directory for each individual host you define. This seems like a lot, but I promise it'll make sense and you'll appreciate it in just a moment. For Smart One Cloud folks, you will make a directory for that cosmetic management alias that you used in the inventory file. Here, for example, it would be cpmgmt01. For MDS folks, in the host vars subdirectory, you will make a directory for the name of each management domain you defined, including the global domain. You absolutely want to do this. You can make yourself a short bash script to do it for you if you have a lot of domains. Why are these directories? And are they all required? For the host directories, yes. For the groups, you really should. In the group vars directory, you want the directory check_point at least. You might even want to use an all group directory. Now we will pick and choose what goes where. Here's a link to Ansible's variable precedence rules and inheritance. You'll want to keep this on hand for a while until you learn it more. With our inventory structure, I'm setting you up for success and for the least amount of trouble. Here is a short version of Ansible's inheritance rules. For every group you define in the inventory, Ansible will parse the group vars directory and find a directory named after that group. For every host you define in the inventory, Ansible will parse the host vars directory and find a directory named after that host. In each of these discovered directories, Ansible will read all the files in the given directory and merge the contents of every YAML or JSON file it finds, regardless of the file name. Attributes, or variables, defined in the group vars directories are loaded and applied first. Any host belonging to that group will get those variables attached to the host immediately. Attributes, or variables, defined in the host vars directory for a specific host will get loaded and applied to that individual host. The intersection of those two operations is the resulting set of variables for a host. A group does not contain nor hold variables on its own. The group variables are instead copied to the group member host. Keep this in mind if you are applying variables to nested groups. So what if you have the same variable defined in two different places but with two different values? The last one loaded wins. Later definitions of a variable overwrite earlier definitions. Okay, but how does Ansible know which one is first and which one is last? Good question. The technical answer is lexicographical order. That's a hard word to say. Please don't make me say it again. Lexical order means roughly alphabetical order. Numbers first, then uppercase, then lowercase. That's for the names of the files. You need to be aware if your file system stores file names in a case-sensitive manner or not. Most Linux file systems are case-sensitive by default. Windows NTFS and the Mac APFS by default are not case-sensitive, but they can be changed, usually requiring a reformat and erase to start over. Yes, I said NTFS is not case-sensitive. You can write files that look like they're case-sensitive, but they're not. So what variables go in what files? Good question, and we'll go through that now. For any given directory, if you're not sure what file name to use for a variables file, then you can just use a well-known default value named vars.yml. You can name this file anything you want, but that's just rather common to see. Everyone will know what that is. Vars.yml is good for a small collection of unrelated or even semi-related items. I even use this myself for a lot of things. Later, as you start getting very specific collections of variables, things that are all related together, you'll want to make them into their own variable file. Let's start in the group vars directory for the high-level group checkpoint. In this directory, using your favorite text editor, create a new file. Here, I'm just going to use vars.yml. Start with the YAML opening markers and end the file with the YAML closing markers. Your content goes in between. The checkpoint group variables will be applied to every host in this group. So we only need a few items here. Ansible HTTP API, use SSL, true. This variable tells the Ansible HTTP plugin to use TLS instead of plain text. Yes, it says SSL, but that's a historic name. It's going to use TLS. Ansible HTTP API, validate certs, false. This variable tells the HTTP plugin not to require certificate verification in the certificate store, such as your NSS database on Linux. The checkpoint management server is its own private PKI CA server, so it issues these certificates, and of course, this cannot be changed. Ansible HTTP API port 443. This variable tells the Ansible HTTP plugin what port number to use on the management API server. By default, this variable is 443 anyway. If your management API server is on an alternate port, you set that here. This variable can be defined in several other places depending on your needs, so this really does not have to be defined here. This again is why we spent all that time with the API status output. Save this vars.yml file and you're done. Now go up 2 directory levels and go down to the host vars directory and into the directory for your management server. In my case, this is the directory named cpmgmt01. For Smart One Cloud folks, this is your cosmetic alias for your tenant. For MDS, this will be your MDS root or system data domain. In this directory, create a new YAML file named vars.yml. The contents of this file are going to differ for each of the 3 management server types. Starting with the single domain security management server, you will define the variable Ansible_host, and the value will be the IP address of your management server. You can use a DNS hostname here, but you will need to make sure your DNS server and records stay current. If you have a CloudGuard management server, then you will use the public IP NAT address, not the Azure VNet private address or the AWS VPC private address. For Smart One Cloud, this is where you will map the alias to your Smart One Cloud tenant. You will define the variable Ansible_host, and the value will be the host name of your tenant. You also need a second variable named Ansible Cloud Management ID. This will be the UUID of your management instance. You can find this ID in the Infinity Portal settings for your tenant. The Checkpoint Management API plugin will know to look for these variables when it makes a connection to the API server. There's nothing more you need to do. For multi-domain, you also need to define the variable Ansible_host and the IP address of your MDS server. You won't define any domain-specific items in here because not all operations are going to be against the system data domain. Now you need to define the individual management domains. Go up 1 directory. If you have lots of domains, there's no real easy way to do this unless you write a bash script to do it for you. But here is a template of what you need. For every management domain, create a directory in the host vars subdirectory. For every management domain, in each directory for that domain, create a file named vars.yml. Each file will contain these 2 variables, Ansible_host and Ansible_checkpoint_domain. Ansible host is always the IP address of the MDS server. If you have MDS HA, then this needs to be the IP address of the server where the management domain is active. Ansible checkpoint domain is the name of the management domain as you see it in Smart Console. Be careful, this is not the name of the CMA domain server. Do not try to use the output of MDS env to do this. Case also matters here. One more edit for MDS. Go back up a directory and go to the group vars directory. Hopefully you made a group to hold all of your management domains. Go into the directory for the name of that group. In my case, it's mgmt_domains. For you, you get to take advantage of Ansible's inheritance rules now. Create a new file named vars.yml. Inside this file, add these variables: Ansible HTTP API validate certs false, Ansible HTTP API use SSL true, Ansible HTTP API port 443, Ansible network OS, and the value is check_point.mgmt.checkpoint. This last one is new. You can add this variable only in this location. Do not add this variable to your MDS host, and do not add the MDS host to the management domains group. This variable tells Ansible when connecting to the management domain to load the correct HTTP plugin for the management API. Save this file and you're done. For everyone, this is the minimum you need to get started. No, we did not write that administrator API keystring in the inventory. Yes, we can do it. We'll do that in an upcoming episode, but only after we cover a few more topics. You've done enough work for now. That's all for this episode. Your Ansible environment is coming along nicely. Good work. Some of this may have been a bit tedious, but I promise all of this hard work is about to pay huge dividends. You have one last piece of setup to do, which we'll cover in the next episode. Be sure to hit that subscribe button below so you know when new content is available. Please click the thumbs up button and leave a comment to let me and others know how this video helped you. Join me in the next video and we'll install the checkpoint module collections, peer into the Ansible galaxy, and do a quick setup of your local Git repository.